Good afternoon, everyone. What a beautiful day in Fairfield County. It's good to see all of you here today. My name is Paul Scaff. I am the CEO for the Connecticut Democracy Center. I want to thank you all for accepting the invitation to come here today and spend some time with us. Welcome to Civics on the Road, where we bring important conversations about government, civic engagement, and civic education to communities around our state. This is our second trip to Fairfield, and we are delighted to be back in the region once again. I want to thank our host, the Fairfield Museum and History Center. I want to thank our caterers, David Allen, certainly our many board members from the Democracy Center who are seated around the room today, and also our staff who are with us here today. We have Sally Whipple, Executive Director of Connecticut's Old State House. You all were greeted by Matt LaCoyle, our Director of Development, who all gave us our name tags today. And Dan Petrolito, our Executive Director of Media Services, is helping record us today. Our board members who are in the room today, would you mind just raising a hand just so you can be recognized? There they are. Yep, fantastic. So let's talk just briefly for a minute before we invite our featured speaker up here today. Civic engagement and civic education are vital pillars of a healthy and functioning democracy. I hope we would all agree. Civic education teaches people how their government works, what rights and responsibilities they have, how to participate effectively. And without this knowledge, citizens can't meaningfully influence decisions that affect their lives. Engaged citizens also hold leaders accountable. When people know how to advocate or protest or petition or even attend a public meeting, they push institutions to be more responsive and more transparent. When people engage civically through volunteering, community organizing, or public dialogue, they build trust and they build social cohesion. It reduces polarization and helps communities solve problems together. A well-educated and engaged public is the best defense against authoritarianism, disinformation, and political apathy. Civic education fosters critical thinking, media literacy, and a commitment to democratic norms like free speech and fair elections. Civic engagement gives marginalized voices a way to be heard. When everyone understands how to participate, it helps reduce inequality and it strengthens representation. In short, I think civic engagement is how democracy breathes, and civic education is how it learns to walk. Today we'll take some good deep breaths together. We'll take a few more steps along the path to a healthy republic. It's programs like this, Civics on the Road, that we hope to use to spread this message and or our other programs that we do offer. And if you'd like to support us in this effort, we would appreciate if you would consider making a donation today. It is now my pleasure to introduce a current member of the Connecticut Democracy Center Board and former board chair, Mr. Michael Imber.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. I'm Mike Imber, and I am a member of the board for the Connecticut Democracy Center. Just to augment what Paul was saying, we are a nonpartisan, not-for-profit organization, and our mission is to inspire people of all ages to engage and strengthen their communities through civic participation. We envision a society where everyone is empowered to participate in our democracy. And Civics on the Road, our programs are designed to bring that inspiration and empowerment to audiences all over Connecticut. I'll just underline now, and then at the end, if you want to make a donation to the Democracy Center, there are scannable URL codes right there on your table, so please consider. And today, we're going to have a conversation about a topic that some of you may be familiar with. It's charming. Some would say it's antiquated, but I don't believe that, called the rule of law. And as I am not an attorney and don't play one on television, we have invited George Jepsen, the 24th Attorney General for the state of Connecticut, to join us and help explain these ideas. Just before I bring George up, a brief bio. George's legal and public service career has spanned more than 40 years. His public service includes 16 years in the Connecticut General Assembly, both as a state representative and later as a state senator representing the districts around Stamford and Darien. He served 6 years in the role of Senate Majority Leader, and he was very active on abortion rights, control, domestic violence, and open space preservation issues, among many others. He was elected as the state's Attorney General in 2010 and then re-elected in 2014. And as Attorney General, George had a leadership role in several successful national, bipartisan, multi-state investigations and litigation matters, including national bank predatory lending practices, Standard & Poor's and Moody's mislabeling mortgages, mortgage-backed securities resulting in the 2008 financial crisis, the Volkswagen emissions cheating scandal, massive price fixing among generic drug manufacturers, and corporate marketing fraud creating the opioid crisis. He served as president of the Bipartisan National Association of Attorneys General from 2016 to 2017, and twice co-chaired the Democratic Attorney Generals Association. He is a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Dartmouth College and earned a dual Juris Doctor and master's degree from Harvard Law School and the Kennedy School of Government. Since leaving public service, he has been practicing law in his own firm. Please join me in welcoming Attorney General George Jepsen.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. All right, well, George, let's start with a basic definition. What is the rule of law, and why is it important in a democracy?
The rule of law is completely foundational to our democratic institutions. What it stands for is law needs to be fairly and equally applied, and it needs to be fairly and equally applied to both institutions and individuals. And I sometimes call it kind of the secular religion of democracy. It really creates the framework under which we all operate, and it's our democracy's operated since 1789, and it's essential for not just the spiritual health of the nation, but for its economic well-being and equal treatment for citizens before the law.
Okay. Before we get to the challenges that I was alluding to about the rule of law, could you identify for us what you believe might be the 3 or 4 fundamental core strengths of the rule of law as it exists in the United States today?
Well, I would say it has encouraged civic engagement and in ways that is unseen except in a few Western democracies around the world. We have a well-developed body of the recent events notwithstanding. We'll get to more of that in a couple of minutes, but we have a foundation of constitutional and common law that is kind of unparalleled around the world. I think that when push comes to shove, most citizens firmly believe in our judicial institutions, and they are respectful of decisions that judges have made. They may not always agree with them, but for the most part, I think that people have confidence in the judiciary, and I think certainly in the last decade or so, when there have been times of stress, it's particularly in a time where the Congress is very dysfunctional. The judiciary stands out as much closer to being a model of predictability and sanity, though not always. So
this leads us to what I think is going to be the main part of our discussion is there's been a lot happening in our country in the last few months, and there are some who believe that the rule of law is threatened. And depending on which side of the political spectrum you might be on, you might agree or disagree with that statement, but do you see 3 or 4 threats that we could talk about to the rule of law?
I could probably list even more, but and not in order of importance, but in the order that I think of them. We have a real problem in this country with our inability to have a civil dialogue and a civil discourse across the board. And I remember when I ran in 2010, which now is 15 years ago, it was already a problem. I was interviewed at a newspaper for an editorial interview and endorsement, and they asked the question, what's the biggest problem that we have? And I said, it's our inability to have a civil dialogue. At the times when people would meet and talk and develop bipartisan relationships is being threatened. And when that is threatened, so much of the underpinnings of actually functioning as a democracy go with it. So layered on top of that is the hyperpartisanship, and both parties are guilty to one degree or another of this. And the part of that is structural. There are very, very few swing congressional districts these days because the Supreme Court has not engaged in trying to break up gerrymandering. And so that means that most congressional districts are safe if you win your Democratic or your Republican primary. And so that's the real battleground in lots of states, and that's in primaries tend to be low turnout, and the people who turn out in them are the hyperpartisans within each party. And so each party seems to be governed more and more by its fringe rather than the mainstream, and the inducements and to be bipartisan and to try and build bridges are lost. That it's not fully the case, but I've seen that in the world of state attorneys general, where I really enjoyed living and working for 8 years as attorney general, and I still do a lot of work in that space now. And attorneys general, I think, are viewed compared to the governors' associations, which there's huge division, let alone the U.S. Congress, where people don't talk to one another if they're from another party. You know, if you have a conversation, you know, it's sad that they don't have the conversations that they used to have a generation ago. But even in the world of state attorneys general, because there's not a Democratic or Republican way to tackle the opioid issue, for example, or price fixing. There's still more partisanship even in that world than there was when I joined it.
Do you think that there's been politicization of our legal institutions that's creating a challenge to the rule of law?
Yes, I do. It used to be that Supreme Court justices were chosen, nominated by the president, and because there was a cloture rule in the Senate where you needed to get 60 votes for all federal judges, that meant that neither party could go to extremes in putting judges in there. And Harry Reid, the Democratic Majority Leader, reacting to the Republican senators dragging, he was the minority leader at the time, excuse me. When he became Majority Leader, he eliminated the cloture rule for Supreme Court justices, and so that they could get under Obama judges passed. And what goes around comes around. Now the Democrats can't stop any Republican judge as long as the Republicans stand firm. And that means that the Federalist Society under Leonard Leo, with all the funding he has, makes it very hard for a moderate Republican to be selected for a federal judgeship. So there is a lot more partisanship in the selection of judges, and that, of course, filters down into how decisions are made. But it's true of both parties.
Interestingly, I think that a number of decisions have been made in recent months by judges that President Trump appointed that President Trump didn't appreciate the decision because there was a belief in the rule of law by even the Trump-appointed judges.
No, I'm glad you brought that up. If you had said to me that President Trump would turn on Leo, who made Trump's dominance of the judiciary possible, I would never have believed it. But in fact, that has happened because President Trump can't believe it when a Trump appointee actually rules against him. And one of the issues that we really have now is that it's very clear that loyalty to Trump is the defining criteria for being selected as a federal judge, not whether you're the eminently qualified.
Do you think that there's been an erosion of norms where there's a growing disregard for legal norms and institutions that have impacted decisions and the adherence to law?
Yes, an environment is created where more than 1,000 convicted felons who stormed the Capitol were pardoned. What kind of message does that send for respect for legal process? And other pardons and to other people who are convicted felons have followed as well. And so there's a certain level of contempt that expresses the kind of contempt for the law that is corrosive. I have to say, however, that these are difficult choices. When Democrats say they are not going to cooperate with ICE, or they're going to ignore ICE, or that somebody who is in this country illegally can't be, there's nothing to be done about that. We don't send a message, and this is extremely difficult and nuanced issues. I'm certainly not in favor of scooping up every illegal alien and throwing them out of the country, because law enforcement really does involve exercise of discretion of when to enforce a law and when not to enforce it. Just, if the speed limit is 55 and you're going 58, and you get pulled over, well, that might have been a little bit abusive discretion by the police officer, but Democrats sometimes send the wrong message as well.
Okay. Speaking of nuanced, we talked about this briefly, so bear with us because we're all still learning about yesterday's Supreme Court decision in Trump versus Casa. But the decision that was rendered by a 6-3 majority court effectively limited federal district court judges from providing a national injunction and against executive action. And this is where we get into conflict at the intersection of what's the rule of law and what's policy. And the Trump administration has been putting forward a lot of policies that have been challenged in many different jurisdictions about whether or not whether they were constitutional. We're still learning a lot about it, but do you have some preliminary observations, George, about what the implication of this decision could mean?
Starting with, we don't know what the full implication is going to mean, and I would hesitate to rush for judgment. This practice of going to a single district court judge and asking for a national injunction is very new to process in this country. It is legally existed for decades or so, but it didn't become common until really the last 12 or 15 years. And be careful what you wish for. A lot of it began when Obama was president, and he was frustrated for good reason with being unable to get to work with Congress, especially after they lost majorities in 2010. And so the Republicans started challenging his executive orders, and when Trump came in, the Democrats repeated the same. Biden, and so each side has adopted an approach that I think is not especially healthy, which is that the Democrats always go to San Francisco or Boston to file cases in district courts. The Republican, there's a judge in, most judicial districts have considerably more than one federal judge. There's a district in northern Texas. There's a single federal judge. It starts with K. I can never pronounce his last name, but he is a MAGA all the way. Mm-hmm. And so the Republicans start all their cases in front of this judge. He just signs off immediately, and that's in an appellate district that's very conservative. So we have this kind of dueling approach. Well, it depends on who's president, but I don't think that's a very healthy way to be dealing with these issues. Now it's clear that, and I think that when the 14th Amendment is applied to people born here, I think that in the end, the side that I support, which is, if the amendment says if you're born here, you're an American citizen. That's going to be pretty clear. I think that's going to prevail in the end, and there ought to be a way to, and it's be some tricky line drawing, drawing lines between issues that are clearly national in scope and would upend all kinds of kind of settled norms and relationships if it's not an issue that's dealt with quickly and on a national basis, like the underlying issue in CASA. And then issues that it's harder to make the case of just how national a particular issue is, get those sorted out, so that we aren't in this kind of dueling forum shopping, which is just unhealthy for democracy and unhealthy for legal process. But but there are going to be ways to make, without a national injunction, there are going to be ways that are being explored, and
Class action lawsuit.
class action being the most obvious, but there are other ways as well, and hopefully we can get on those critical issues a process that's expedited. So I'm frustrated by what's going on, but I think that we should wait and see how these alternatives that was the way things were done until 15 years ago, the overwhelming majority of the time. Wait to see how this process unfolds.
There are any number of situations that are currently developing right now that challenge the rule of law. Are there any particular ones that you're monitoring that you'd like to chat about?
I'm always trying to understand what's going to happen with the U.S. Congress and how the fever's going to, how and when the fever's going to break on how Trump governs. And
You mean respecting Congress's role?
Yeah. That's very important to me. And the fever's not going to break anytime soon unless inflation goes, back to 7% or 8% and stays there, or if there's issues, national issues that inform policy that Trump owns and prove to be disastrous. We're kind of locked in a status quo that I've already talked about some parts of it, which is that the hyperpartisanship within the nation, hyperpartisanship within the Congress, the fact that districts have been drawn so that 90% of them are not effectively contested. But
The concept of separation of powers goes all the way back to the days of the Enlightenment and the philosophers that influenced the founding fathers, John Locke, Rousseau, Montesquieu. And that's what was built into the Constitution. But to your point about Congress, there are two areas that I can think of off the top of my head where Congress seems to have abdicated some of its powers. First is the power of tariff. And that's something that's explicitly written into law that says this is Congress's purview. And they've ceded that to the administration. And then the second, this one's not as big of a deal because it's been going on for a long time, but the war powers. And I think it was the Senate yesterday voted down a resolution saying, are we going to authorize the president to do more in Iran? And it got voted down whether or not Congress is going to be doing the authorization. But this is something that's been in violation for a long time, so maybe it's not that big of a deal. But is there anywhere else that you see Congress weakening that separation of powers concept?
Yeah, first of all, you're right. The last time Congress declared war was 1941, and that little thing, Pearl Harbor, was the trigger. We have the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, obviously, but that wasn't
not exactly a declaration
of war. A decision that was reported and kind of the Supreme Court junkies looked a lot at was the late last year overturning of what's called the Chevron doctrine. I don't know if anybody rings a bell with anybody.
Agency power, right?
Agency power. Going back a generation, it was actually Justice Scalia who I think wrote the decision. It stamped Supreme Court approval that Congress could kind of loosely delegate to agencies. And when we say agencies, we're talking about the whole federal government. You know, every, you know, whether it's Department of, you know, the FTC, Department of Education, FCC, you name it, they could kind of state a goal and say, you guys are the experts in the agency on environmental issues, whatever, and you go out and fix it with your powers. And it's been kind of an obsession within the conservatives that, and even though Scalia wrote the opinion, this delegation of powers was turning, made the, you know, the bureaucrats kind of kings of the realm, and because courts under the Chevron doctrine would defer to whatever the agencies want to do. Very seldom would a court assume that it knew better than what an agency knew. And so the Chevron doctrine, with the same majorities that they have now, overturned the Chevron doctrine and said that on major questions, the Congress has to be very clear in its delegation of what an agency is supposed to do. And I just don't see Congress getting its act together to provide that level of specificity.
So was that Supreme Court decision really a reversal, a contradiction of precedent, or was it a clarification, an evolution of the concept?
It was mostly the latter. It was mostly Chevron went way, way too far in creating deference to agencies. And so Congress is going to need to be much more specific. Otherwise, courts have the power to override and overrule. And I think that's going to have a real impact on, because Congress at this time can't really do much of anything on a bipartisan basis. They're not going to. It's going to be paralytic on government.
Okay. I want to ask one or two more questions, and then we're going to open it up for a Q&A with the audience. We've talked about what is the rule of law, what are its strengths. We've been talking a lot about the challenges, but what gives you hope? Where's there opportunity to strengthen the rule of law as it's practiced today?
What gives me hope is that this country's been through stuff that's, you know, arguably worse than what we're going through right now. And
Red Scare days?
Red Scare was an example of that. The Depression,
Vietnam War.
The Civil War, and sometimes things have to play themselves out a little bit. I made a tacit reference to that before, and it may be that things have to get worse before they get better. But it's just a reminder that, to me, that elections have consequences, and the importance of the Supreme Court and the judiciary. And that means that if people recall, nobody here was around then, but you had a very, very conservative Supreme Court from the turn of the century on, and eventually, and we're doing very, very conservative economic regulation. And when it was just became clear that that finally was not working, the court switched, you know, and so it's going to take time, but there's hope. But it also it talks to and this is where I get a little pessimistic. We're not very good at civic engagement in our teaching in our schools and the like, and I think that social media, which allows everybody, both Democrats and Republicans, to kind of select their media sources and listen, live in an echo chamber of where they only hear what they want to hear reinforced, is
On
very
both
concerning.
sides.
On both sides.
Yeah.
On both sides is very concerning.
Last question is, and this, it sounds kind of funny when I say it out loud, but is the rule of law a shared responsibility? Like, do we all share in that responsibility?
Absolutely. It's something that if people aren't out there as active citizens nurturing it, it can get lost. And so it's just critically important that people who care about and love this country on both sides of the aisle really try to encourage development of law, a legal system that is fair and equally applied and accessible to all.
Got to go out and vote. Thank you very much. And we'd like to open it up for questions.
Speaking of voting, we have the lead.
Oh, yes,
the
let's
lead
acknowledge our Secretary of State, Stephanie
Hey,
Thomas.
Stephanie.
Short, Stephanie. Questions from the audience?
Hi, thank you, both of you, for that. I'm trying to put two decisions together, and I'm not an attorney, so forgive me if this doesn't make sense, but I'm trying to put together the overturning of Chevron with this new CASA decision, and I'm just wondering how anything gets done. If Congress has to be specific, and Congress is not acting, so therefore then the courts will step in and stop them, but you almost have to take it one case at a time. It feels like it's just put in another roadblock for lots of things happening, but maybe I misunderstand.
No, I think that you're right, that there will be roadblocks, and you're also going to see a larger patchwork of decisions depending on the court jurisdictions, that different courts in different, this goes on now, but different courts in different parts of the country are going to be interpreting the laws in different ways. And so there'll be more of a balkanization of a lot of how issues are handled.
Thank you for the question, Dr. Ligo. What?
How does that tend to evolve and for the betterment? Split it up or work together?
So much depends on whether, short of these national injunctions, which again, were not really part of how our legal system operated, from 1789 until 2015 or so. We lived without it before, and we'll learn to live without it again. But a lot depends on how the court responds to. I'll just give an example with class action suits. They're complicated to put together, and they take time, and a lot will depend on if they're going to work and help fill a void. There's going to be legal challenges to those, and we'll see how those challenges go, whether it's going to, compared to injunctions, is it going to be much, much slower or just slower?
Thank you for the question. Tim Rogers.
Do you believe in term limits for judges as a way to kind of move things around a little bit? If you get like the super conservative group in the Supreme Court, or you get a super liberal group, that they would come and go, and you wouldn't be sort of stuck?
My view of judges is that, well, first of all, Connecticut is lucky our judges are appointed. In some, I'm going to expand your question a little bit. I think I hate direct election of judges because I think it politicizes an office that where you should be appointed, and it could be for a period of time. Like in Connecticut, you get an 8-year appointment, and there's a kind of a understanding that you'll be reappointed unless you've done something really stupid or bad. But there's the job security is, I think, an important aspect to it. I wouldn't mind seeing an age limit on federal judges for the Supreme Court, like there is for judges in other places, and that would help ensure some turnover. But I thought Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a great judge, but she should have gotten out 4 years earlier, so that Obama could have appointed a successor. Stephen Breyer should have learned from that, and he did get out. It would not shock me if 2 years from now it looks like, or 3 years from now it looks like the Democrats have a very good chance of electing a president that Justices Thomas and Alito might step down.
More questions? We'll get you around.
Sorry. Why don't you, I defer to
Sure. Which guest over here?
Roan, right here.
I know you're close. Thank you.
You've made a lot of comments about concerns of the threats to the rule of law at the federal level. I wondered if you could make some comments about, are you seeing things that give you concern at the state level regarding threats to the rule of law? And if you could make, if you care to make a comment on where does Connecticut stand in the spectrum of that?
Happily, and I'm very sincere in saying this, I think that Connecticut and the rule of law does really pretty well. They actually do have working relationships within the legislature between Republicans and Democrats. And while things get acted out in the press, but there are working relationships behind the scenes. I think that Governor Lamont has done a good job in kind of being a calming influence on the process. And so I don't see Connecticut as a real problem. We also benefit from the fact that under Connecticut has probably the sanest redistricting law in the country, because it requires a bipartisan to be a bipartisan commission for Democrats, for Republicans, irrespective of the makeup of the legislature. So it's 8 commissioners, who are end up being legislators, 4 Democratic legislators, 4 Republican legislators, and they choose a neutral 9th vote, who, if there is a split, and it's then the 8 are unable to reach a decision, he or she is the vote that creates a 5-4. And this has been the law since 1970 or 80. 70 or 80 was when the new, they do the census, and then in 80, the next year, you put this commission together, and by the year 2, they're voting on it. And some years it's been more difficult than in other years, but they've always been able to reach a consensus eventually. Sometimes they had to kind of do a show in court and stuff like that. But compared to, and if you look at Connecticut's districts, some of them look a little wacky, but they're not completely wacky. The way you go to North Carolina or Ohio, where the districts just kind of loop like snakes through that are just designed to put the party in control, have a lopsided margin in the congressional control.
Other questions?
Thanks. You referred to the fact we live, as we all know, in such divisive times. We see in the Roberts Court a really great leaning towards states' rights, whether it's the Dobbs case for abortion, whether it's this term for the ability for children to get transgender care. It's being left up to the states. How do you see this as impacting our national fabric of our society? Separate camps, people, if I live in Georgia and I have a child who I think needs transgender care, I move up north. If I need an abortion, I go someplace. I don't want to be in those places. I move to other places. Is this in many ways better for the country in that our camps stay separate? I can't imagine that, but how do we deal with it as opposed to the national struggle?
It does mean that there'll be more balkanization on issue by issue, but that might end up being a kind of a pressure valve, release valve, which if you want to be transgender in Florida isn't good for you, but the Republicans built, and I'm being analytical here, not judgmental, and Connecticut was the first state in the country to codify Roe versus Wade as our law, and we did it in 1990, and I was the person who introduced it, so I'm very, very, very pro-choice. And if people knew my mother, they would understand why. But the Republicans built a very successful national movement that was based on getting rid of Roe versus Wade. It became the rallying cry for creating the far right. And George Bush Sr., George H.W. Bush, when he moved to Texas in early 60s or late 50s to get active in politics, he and his wife were members of Planned Parenthood. The Republican Party based itself on rallying people to fight abortion rights. And it was a very successful movement and transformed politics in this country. And and again, I'm a big supporter of Roe versus Wade, but I wonder how the development of politics, where the Republican Party became absolutist on being anti-choice, and it's a fascinating story dating back to the late 70s, how politics in this country would have evolved differently if Roe versus Wade had not existed.
Carol.
So, do you think all this means that as people become more polarized, that a independent party is going to emerge? That and as people move away from joining one party or another, if they think it becomes too extreme?
No, I don't. The Democratic Party, as we now know it, has been around since 1824. The Republican Party nominated a candidate for president in 1856. Since then, we've been through a civil war, the progressive movement, the World War, organized labor, World War I, Great Depression, World War II, and I don't see where a party, an alternative party, emerges, and what would it stand for? Would it be pro-choice or anti-choice? Would it be, where does it stand on military spending? Where does it? That doesn't mean somebody may try to do it, and it would usually be built around a personality like Ross Perot or George Wallace in his time, but it will be nothing more than a splinter that as both those elections did in 68 and Strom Thurmond in 48. Ross Perot may have elected Bill Clinton president, we know, but once it's kind of played itself out, the parties are like amoebas. They kind of move in and absorb the stuff that is popular and redefine themselves around it, and
More questions? We got about 5 minutes left before we got to have a hard stop.
Thank you. So you had talked about before about the court shifting over time to give people more rights. We seem to be going in the wrong direction. Roe's gone. Obergefell is next. Usually the court goes with the people. We go forward. Now we're losing rights. What can we do about that? Anything?
what you say is true. With Obergefell, there is an effort to undo it. And the thing about issues like that, all it takes is, one plaintiff in one jurisdiction to get standing to bring a case that places an issue in front of the court, and the court will, if it can't find some way to avoid the issue, they are going to have to decide it. But even now, a majority of Republicans support gay marriage, and they didn't like losing, what was it, 8 or 10 referendums in a row on when Roe got overturned. They may want to avoid that.
We got time for one more question. Going. Terrell.
We have 3 branches of government, and so the Congress makes the laws, the president's supposed to enforce them, and I guess the judicial is supposed to define them as far as it, right or wrong, or how they're to be applied, if they're applied correctly. What is the check on the judicial system, on the Supreme Court? There seems to be this, there's nothing we can do, because once it gets to the Supreme Court, that's it. There's no other opportunity to change or amend or agree or disagree. So whatever it is that they say, but there's no check or balances on the judiciary or the Supreme Court?
The judiciary is very, very sensitive to their credibility. And that's what destroyed the court in the 30s. They became uncredible. And I know Roberts is very, very concerned about that. Obviously, Justice Thomas and Alito and some of the others less so, but I think I think that the court would be wise to adopt a code of ethics for themselves, just as a self-protective mechanism, but becoming uncredible to the American citizens is something that they really want to avoid. And they also, and this is, and I'm glad you brought this up because, and we can kind of close with this. The interesting tussle that's going to come up is if Trump decides to disobey a court order and you have a constitutional crisis. The polling shows that support is pretty overwhelming for that, saying Trump needs to obey court decisions. Now, I think a majority opposed, clearly opposed bombing Iran, and once it happened, polling within the Republican Party did a shift. So, you know, Trump carries a bunch of people with every decision he makes, but Trump deciding to disobey a court order, especially if it's a significant one. They're clearly dragging their feet all the time on implementing court orders, but if it comes to a showdown, that'll be a very interesting and perhaps horrifying development.
I'd like to thank George Jepsen for being our featured speaker today. Thank all of you for coming, really appreciate it. And thanks to the Fairfield Museum. We're gonna sit around and drink and eat until about 6 o'clock, so you're all welcome to stay. And again, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Michael.